Hello and welcome to episode number 283. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Welcome back. This is a premium episode. It is recorded and reserved for you, our premium subscribers. In our last episode, we learned from Mark Phillips how to use communication as a performance management tool. But how exactly do you do it? In his book, Reinventing Communication, Mark also includes several case studies. In these case studies, he reviews the good, the bad, and the ugly in regards to communication design. And right now, we want to review the success story that is the FA-18EF project. We learn about the number one reason why it was a success, how a vice admiral almost didn't get his star because the communication was so successful, how a common language supports communication success, and we get Mark's tips for all of us on what we can do on our own projects to emulate the successful communication design from the FA-18EF project. As a reminder, don't forget to double your chances of winning his book. We have 2 copies to give away. One copy is reserved for you, and we will randomly pick a winner from the list of our premium subscribers. But if you go to facebook.com/pmpodcast, you can also join the free giveaway. It's twice the fun. And now, what could it be? What is the number one reason why the FA-18EF project was such a communication success? Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview.
Today with Mark Phillips, author of Reinventing Communication.
Mark, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Cornelius.
So we are still talking about your book, Reinventing Communication, How to Design, Lead, and Manage High-Performing Projects. And as part of this book, you have several case studies. Some case studies are success stories, others are failures, and we want to focus on a success story today, the FA-18. And before we get into anything, tell me, what was the single most biggest contributing factor to the success of this program?
Trust. Without a doubt, everybody involved with the program, from the vice admiral, who was the program manager on this $3.3 billion 10-year program, all the way to different analysts that were working in various government offices, to contractor organizations. Trust was clearly identified as the biggest success factor to the program.
All right. And now that everybody's interested and wants to know how they did that, let's take a step back and let's take a look at the metrics around this program for a bit. Tell us a little bit about what the FA-18 is, when it was happening, how many people were involved, the size of it all, and then we'll get back to trust.
Absolutely. So the FA-18EF, which is called the Super Hornet, that was a $3.3 billion program that took place between 1993 and 2003, led by the United States Navy. It was an upgrade, essentially, to the FA-18, but really had a whole new set of specifications and adding incredible capabilities to this aircraft. And the E and the F referred to the 1-seat versus 2-seat versions of this aircraft. It was a project that had extremely high visibility. It was basically created in the highest offices in the United States within the executive branch, and included stakeholders ranging from the vice president and president's office through members of Congress and many of the largest aerospace and defense contractors that you could think of, as well as a variety of subcontractors throughout there that were involved in the project. And then, of course, had stakeholders, which included people in the local communities that were employed by these organizations. And one of the incredible things about it is that it came in on budget, on time, and even over-delivered on the technical performance metrics. It was 400 pounds lighter than anticipated. So it is widely hailed as one of the most successful U.S. Navy and certainly one of the most successful defense programs really in the history of the acquisition system. And one of the remarkable things is from an earned value management perspective, I've had the pleasure of seeing the earned value management S-curve that was originally drawn at the beginning of the program, and then what it looked like at the end. And barring just some slight deviations, it looks as if they actually traced right over it. And of course, they didn't trace right over it. What it shows is how they were able to use the earned value management system and methodology as a common language, and more importantly, as a guidepost to continually steer the program towards where they wanted it to be and where their stakeholders expected it to be.
All right, so we know that trust is the single biggest contributor to the success of the program, but we also know that your book is about communication. So how does trust and communication, where does it meet?
An outstanding question. Thank you for asking that, Cornelius. The communication environment creates trust in a project environment. If you have a communication environment that is focused on, that is essentially a negative communication environment where people are confused, where people are scared, where they don't know how to navigate clearly the project processes environment they're in, where they don't know what the expectations are, where they don't know what the common language is. How do you move the needle on progress one way or another? Or how do I surface mistakes without getting punished? If you have that kind of confusion in the environment, you basically have many people who are essentially lost from a navigation standpoint, and that creates an environment of distrust, mistrust, and really people hold information tightly. They don't share. They might be more likely to give misinformation because they're trying to protect themselves because they're not sure which way the wind is blowing. So that is on the negative side. On the positive side, when you have a collaborative and constructive communication environment, that suddenly breeds trust. A great example is the FA-18EF program. One of the key things that they did in establishing trust, they said, we got the big things right up front. We decided on a common language for the program. They happened to pick EVM, but the key was they picked a common language. So everybody knew how to move the needle. Everybody knew that leadership on down was speaking the same terminology. And if we wanted to affect project performance and move it forward, this is the language that we had to communicate it in, right? If things were getting bad, it would be reflected in SPI or CPI. If things were good, it's reflected in SPI and CPI. We know where we're heading and how to get there. We're all using the same GPS, speaking the same language, having the same map, and we all have the same reward and punishment system. So that's critical, that communication environment, to creating trust. And this is not only observation. There's a wide body of research that supports this. And there's actually a wide body of research that takes this a step further and talks about how having then an environment of trust then leads to knowledge sharing, leads to knowledge creation, leads to innovation, and leads to performance.
Now, let me make sure I get this right. Earned value management, EVM, which is most often considered to be a hard tool, was used on this project in order to support communications. Is that right?
100%. And that's
wow.
That's what one of the ideas on reinventing communication. It's looking at these apparently hard tools or decisions that we might make, such as who's going to be assigned to what task, or what tools or methodology we're going to use. And it's realizing that these are actually communication environments of communication design decisions that we're making. And the incredible thing is you have visionary leaders like this Vice Admiral Dyer and his entire team, which realize that on a $3.3 billion program and could actually attribute the success of it to making those communication choices.
In our first interview, we talked about the need to design communications, to put down rules and to make sure everybody understands these rules. And it sounds like they did the same thing here with using earned value management as part of their language, as part of the way they communicated. Do you know more about how they designed this, how they communicated this, how they taught people to understand earned value management? Because it's not the easiest thing to learn about and understand and get into your head.
That's a great question. It starts with leadership. Leadership has to decide this is the lingua franca, as it were, of our program. From there are a variety of ways. There are a tremendous number of learning resources out there that can teach earned value management, whether within an environment or when bringing in people or attending classes, or certainly incredible self-study tools. If I just may plug, the ones that you create, Cornelius, are all extremely valuable for learning earned value management and other performance management techniques. I also happen to be a board member of an organization called the College of Performance Management, which is very much focused on earned value management and integrated performance management education. So we certainly have conferences and a whole universe of vendors that are very adept at teaching earned value management within an organization. I can tell you that once people start to learn it, it is making sure that it gets used. And that means that you have to have weekly reports, because you can actually get weekly earned value management data, because it doesn't require, contrary to many people's beliefs, it doesn't require having to have accounts rolled up, actual costs rolled up to start to get very relevant from an accounting system, to start to get very relevant earned value management data that you can look at on a weekly basis. So building in the ceremonies, as it were, to use from the Agile universe, but building in the ceremonies that reinforce the importance of earned value management, help bring people up to speed, and of course creating an environment where just because you mess up a calculation the first couple times, you don't get thrown out of the meeting and kicked out. So there has to be, if you are at a maturing in that aspect, there has to be an environment that understands that that's what's taking place within it. And certainly for very large organizations and large endeavors, like I about 6 months ago, I think I looked on Elon Musk's SpaceX program on his, just to see what kind of skill sets he was looking for in his program. And there certainly are already very highly trained personnel that are expert in doing earned value management that can always be brought on to complement, teach, and help support these kind of efforts within a project.
When you're using accurate and reliable data in support of earned value management, you create transparency. You know exactly where you're at. You know the good, you know the bad, you know the ugly. How did leadership ensure that communication didn't break down when it came to the ugly side of things? Because it's so easy to kind of forget to mention a few things, to not communicate the bad things and only focus on communicating the good side of your project. How did they get across that? Because it's human nature to try and sort of hold back the bad stuff.
Absolutely. And on behalf of your listeners, I want to thank you for surfacing that, because so often when I talk to people in organizations, they think it only happens in their company. It only happens because of a few bad apples in their organization. But it's absolutely, as you mentioned, a near universal phenomena. And this goes back to the concept of creating a constructive communication environment where people will see that they're not punished for being the bearer of bad news. It's something that I like to call, think of yourself as Scotty. It's the Scotty principle from the old Star Trek. When Scotty would talk to the captain and say, the warp drive is shot, it's going to take 6 hours to fix it, the captain never said, you know what, Scotty, you're an idiot. You're a terrible engineer. Why did you break the warp drive? The captain knew that Scotty was a well-trained professional and who was simply conveying the facts so that he, as the captain, could then have the business intelligence, as it were, the information he needed to make a rational decision on what the plan should be moving forward. So leadership that can create that environment. And I would also argue that project managers that can contribute to that environment, whatever we have within our span of control, can help contribute to that constructive environment so that the good, the bad, and the ugly are all equally appreciated, because the end goal is not to have CPI of 1. The end goal is to have a product that's delivered to the stakeholder specification, meets the need, and gets the job done.
This project was executed in a political environment. So there are always personal agendas, there are political agendas that will try to influence the project and pull it into whatever direction the leading party at the time wanted to pull it. How did leadership communicate that internally? How did they avoid those kind of pull effects?
It's a great question, because I would argue that almost every project, whether it be a large public project within the Department of Defense or even within companies, are always subject to politics and hidden agendas. One of the ways to combat that is having that common language, is being able to express things in a common language and always bringing it down to a common denominator of, does this move the project forward or not? There's a great concept that I talk about in the book, which is a concept of a boundary object. It comes from the world of anthropology, from a woman named Lee Starr. Susan Lee Starr, I believe is her name. And the concept of a boundary object is an object that has sufficient commonality and meaning among different groups that everybody knows what everybody else is talking about, but still can have those differences, nuances, and meaning. A great example that I like to give is our dog. So to me, our dog is a wonderful pet and a companion. To my kids, the dog is a best friend, someone they can confide in, someone who understands what they're going through. And to our veterinarian, the dog is a patient and something that they treat and take care of and look at it a different way. Now, we each have different meanings for what a dog is, but there's no confusion when we talk about a dog. We know what we're talking about. The same can be true on a project. When you create boundary objects, or this lingua franca, as it were, on a project, you suddenly have a way of building bridges and surfacing hidden agendas, and then being able to discuss how those agendas might impact the ultimate goals of the project. What it also does is it also creates an environment where people, if we have a collaborative environment, a constructive environment, where people can surface those agendas, because they're not being, very often people don't have those agendas because they're malicious. Very often these agendas come from people being afraid of the outcome, or concerned how it's going to affect their wheelhouse, their cup of tea, as it were, right? Their bread, their rice bowl, whatever metaphor you want to use. How is it going to affect their bread and butter or their position in it? And if you have a collaborative, constructive environment, those kind of concerns are natural, and in fact, those kind of concerns are often the source of the greatest innovation, because not everybody on the project understands where everybody else is coming from. And it's by bringing those perspectives together that we can actually start to surface all the different dimensions that this project touches upon, and where the project can be going, so that we can find more comprehensive solutions.
On the lighter side of this project, what's the story with the vice admiral and the fact that the communication strategy nearly didn't give him his first star?
Yeah, it's a great story. His communication design was so innovative and so effective that he was actually subject to an internal security investigation that held up his receiving his first star for about a year.
So seriously, because the communication was so good and worked so well, he didn't get a star?
No, he got it. In fact, he got 2 stars, but it's eventually.
Okay.
But again, this is something he jokes about. One can't actually say what caused the internal investigation, but it's something that he lightheartedly jokes about, that it was so effective that it held up his receiving his first star.
Do you know of anything that they did wrong in the beginning, then learned from it and changed in regards to their communication strategy?
I don't know the depth of details on that. Certainly, any project has hiccups along the way, and that you learn from. What they had an incredible ability to do was to learn from hiccups, to learn from when things were getting off course, as it were, because they had that baseline of knowing what the course is they wanted to track to. They had a great ability to see when they were off course and then get on course. Unfortunately, I don't know of specific examples that could bring to the table here.
Well, finally, let's close with a few tips for our listeners here. What 2-3 things can our listeners take from this case study and apply to their own projects?
So the first thing is leadership engagement in creating a communication environment can be a critical success factor. So if leadership defines and designs the right communication environment, you're 90% of the way to having a great project. The second thing is when leadership doesn't, I would contend that you can actually start to use metrics or a lingua franca to show how the communication environment is impacting the project performance, so that you can help kind of lead the way to improve the communication environment. And a third item is to help, just people should create, even within their own sphere of influence or span of control, don't be afraid to bring bad news, and work hard to make an environment where bad news is as welcome or even more welcome than good news, because you can learn from it and at the end of the day actually innovate off of that information to create incredible project results.
As a reminder for everybody, the book is called Reinventing Communication: How to Design, Lead and Manage High-Performing Projects. It is written by Mark Phillips, published by Gower, and about 160 pages or so thick. Mark, thank you very much for coming back today and talking to us about this case study. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Cornelius.
And that was Mark Phillips reviewing why the FA18EF project was so successful, attributed in particular to communications. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become PMP or PMI-ACP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcasts, the PM Prepcast or the Agile Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching the in-depth exam prep video training from pmprepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. To get a project off the ground, tell a colleague that it was their idea. They will put their heart and soul into making it a success. Until next time.